start by standing and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I would like to ask for a motion to accept tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So that was Maria and Brian. And what a day. Today was the first day with our students, so I'm sure you have some news to share with us, Dr. Harrison.
Oh, and that we do. I would say, and this is my 11th year as a superintendent of schools, and it's the first time I've ever had a Board of Education meeting on the first day.
Yeah, okay.
And I think I can attest to my colleagues that I'm tired. But it has been a great start thus far. In many ways, for the adults, the school year started last week.
That's
and
right.
Having our new faculty come in for a couple days and all the faculty returning for 2 days. And we had a very positive spirited kickoff with our faculty, which rolled into the launch of a really great day for the school year. One of the barometers that we always look at is how smoothly transportation operates. Sure. And a lot of credit to folks, our partners in Ardsley Transportation, those at Royal Coach, and of course Carol, and for all her hard work and preparation. It was one of the smoothest openings I've seen from a busing perspective. Buses were pretty close to being on time first day. We know there's always going to be challenges because our kindergartners start riding the buses regular tomorrow, so that will shift things a little bit. And then kind of in my rounds of the campus today, it was just so exciting within such short windows of time to see the kids engaged in learning with teachers like they, just didn't even step out of the classrooms. So I would say that it really positive spirit, positive start to the school year. We're really feeling great about it. Associated with that, the community board will be familiar with the communications that I sent out on Friday related to the topic of school safety and security.
Thank you.
So today was the first day of utilizing our more stringent visitor protocols. And I have to say, we received a few positive emails from parents. Thank you, this is great. Accolades from our staff members as well, folks that are appreciative. But for the most part, people were really understanding that it took a while, our first time going through using the software and printing passes. There are some backlogs, but generally speaking, people were really patient and people understood. And one parent, when I was at Main Street School today, was all apologetic and said, I forgot I don't even have an ID. So it was, testing our system right off the bat.
Yes.
And it was great. We stepped in, and the parent said, I totally understand making me jump through hoops, and I like it because it makes my kids safer. So we're off to a great start. Folks have been real patient and cooperative, and to that we extend our gratitude. Tonight, one of the highlights of this evening is a discussion related to the possible capital bond project. But in doing so, we made lots of other upgrades related to security. You'll see new fencing. We'll see bollards that are placed around our schools. Many new steps that are making our schools more safe, more secure. All of our staff members went through a really good emergency response training session on the first faculty day that was very well received. That's being followed up with more building level training in the next month or so. And now Carol and I today were in meetings mapping out some plans to install security cameras in entranceways and other key locations in our schools. And we're eager to see that work move forward, and we anticipate wiring starting next week over the holidays and installation of cameras over the coming months as they arrive. So lots of good progress on that front that we are proud of. There's lots of exciting things that always happen in our schools at the beginning of the school year, and always you hear me if you go back and watch the first meeting and probably the final meetings of each year, always encouraging folks to keep your eye on school calendars, and we have great new school calendars on the district website, so I want to give a plug for them. But also to school and district newsletters, because there's just so many important events coming up over the coming weeks and months, ranging from open houses beginning as soon as this Thursday at Main Street School. And before we know it, homecoming will be here, which will be a nice celebration for the whole school community. So we should dial into that. But there's also things that happen outside of the school district that are pretty exciting from time to time that do engage our school community. And Friday night, I received a communication from Mr. Schaffer, our village administrator, who had outreach from a representative from the governor's office, who was inviting me to bring a group of students to the opening of the southbound span of the new bridge. So we're excited that we're going to be bringing some students that are on the student journalists with the paw print, and some students potentially from our engineering program. And so we'll be a part of the backdrop, I guess, as the governor does his big announcement and unveiling on Friday morning. You know, it's exciting to see our students become a little part of New York's history when that opens. Absolutely. So that's exciting. I know Dr. Kaur wanted to touch base on some items related to some of our initiatives over the summer.
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to maybe just mention a couple of different thoughts about that. You know, the summer is such great work. It's such a great time. You come in here in the summer when teachers are working, they're in their shorts, they're in their t-shirts, they're comfortable. They just have a different way of thinking in the summer. You know, you have a clearer head. You're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking about what you need to get done or what you have at home that you need to do. And so it really is a great opportunity, and it really lays the foundation for the work that can get done during the school year. So actually, I had one of my regularly scheduled meetings today with our literacy coach, Nancy Deacon, and we talked about the 2-day summer institute that she led in July. So Nancy did a 2-day summer institute, and Christine Rosner did a 2-day math institute. And it's that kind of work that lays the foundation for the connections that our teachers can make to the coach during the year. So it's not that our coaches don't have plenty of other things to do. They have a long list. But when teachers engage in the summer, they then start the year by seeking out. So already, first day of school, I walked by classrooms. Nancy was already in classrooms, and this is only Nancy's second year. So like last year, she didn't even know what room she was, what building she was walking into practically. This year, day one, she's in classrooms, talking about planning for instruction, literacy coach. And there's two things that make having coaches so worthwhile. First is both Christine Rosner and Nancy will now have their short list of new teachers to districts. So one of the problems that every school district has is how do you acclimate your new teachers? How do you give teachers the learning that has happened all over the year before, or 2 years before, or 3 years before? Well, by having instructional coaches, both Christine and Nancy start the year with the shortlist people. So if we have a new kindergarten teacher who has foundations background, but we now ensure that the instruction will be provided consistently with the other teachers because Nancy will be working with Tara just to ensure that she has the knowledge, the skills, the strategies that she needs to implement foundation. So I use that as an example because it is an issue that we have faced for so many years, and I realized today when I was sitting with Nancy going over it, I was like, wow, like that problem has actually gone away. We don't have that issue now. New teacher comes in, Christine Rosner partners with that teacher all year long, checking in, making sure that person knows the curriculum, knows the instructional strategies, and knows that Christine is there, and Christine does side-by-side teaching with that teacher, which is sort of a non-negotiable. So it was just really nice to see how everything comes full circle, and that summer work leading into Nancy already highlighting to me people who want to work with her this year as a result of the summer work, Christine as well. And the last piece I'm going to highlight for that is this summer, Christine Rosner did her work on differentiation. And you can only develop instruction and deliver instruction in a differentiated way if you really know your curriculum well and you know how to assess students. And so that was the work that Christine started that I know that she's going to continue to do throughout the year. So it was just nice to see everything. It comes, not only does it come full circle, but it actually is elevated, and we're seeing higher levels of engagement with our instructional coaches, but also then with the level of work we expect in our classroom. So that was just a quick highlight.
Fantastic.
Great. Well, thank you, Raina. And one example of many that we could share. I know Carol wanted to talk a little bit about food services.
Right, so in addition to smooth security and transportation start, we really had a successful food services start. So if you recall, we've had a new contract this year, we started it. And at Dow's Lane, we made significant change by going to the full offer versus the offer versus serve. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, the full offer means you're taking all 5 items from the required food groups and you're putting them all on the tray. And you're basically plating them, we call it. So that the student doesn't have a choice. There is actually choice of vegetable, and we're plating 2 combinations of different things, believe it or not. There's two vegetable choices, so we're plating the 2 vegetables. They get 4 choices now. And the idea is to get them to be eating the healthier things and not really having a choice to leave it there, because if they have that choice, they probably won't. And they may throw it out, but they may actually eat it. And that's the whole plan. So now there's the 2 hot entrees and the full plating, so that's really kind of an exciting time for Dow's. At the campus, we reformatted the serving area a little bit. The action station and the salad bar switch places. Highlight the salad bar a little bit more. The action station is already very popular, but we combine the smoothies and the salad bar in there together, and it's really, a lot of offerings. And then in the deli bar, we're going to have the ability to make paninis. So now they can take that cold sandwich and make it a hot sandwich. So we really have some new things going on, and it's been exciting, and Dave has been really putting his energy. We actually have some more staff, a little bit more staff this year that he's hired to deliver all the things that they bid on. So I'm excited for a good start.
Just a quick question, is there any sort of internal marketing, both for the students and
There will be.
Yeah.
Actually, it's in the contract that they have to put out some marketing, and I have to approve it all, and there'll be quite a bit of that. And there'll also be a lot more internal marketing on our end, because I plan to use our website now to give more information to parents and so forth. So we've got the menus up, the snack lists are there already. And I plan to do a lot more education there, especially as the year goes on.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Before we transition, I just, at a future business meeting, we'll have committee reports, but since we're just getting going, we don't have any tonight. But I did want to share, NYSBA reached out to a number of people in Westchester and Rockland recently for the opportunity to meet with Congressman Nita Lowey, and so I was able to participate in that event, and I went last Thursday, and it was an excellent meeting. We met her at her office in White Plains, and I had the opportunity to talk about the concern that the federal tax changes pose, the challenge of not only our district but across the country having to deal with security concerns and paying for it, and also about the ongoing concern that our aid is based on a regional index, and that we are tied with districts north of us who have different costs than us, whereas a comparable region like Long Island is tied to New York and gets a higher ratio with their aid. So just a couple items. She actually was getting feedback from us about what the IRS guidance had been, because we had gotten plenty of emails about it, and she so some of that was a little bit of news to her. So it was an opportunity just to let the Congresswoman know our concerns, and so it was a good meeting. So now I believe we move to our discussion item, which is a capital project update, and I know a lot of work going on there, so look forward to the...
Yeah, so as we're setting up, there's been a number of conversations in this room referencing this work, and we've spoken to it on a number of occasions related to security as well. But I want to give accolades to our Buildings and Grounds Committee, who we are eager to invite to join us in the presentation and discussion this evening. And but we started with our capital planning committee process back in the spring, and now our Buildings and Grounds Committee has been really digging in with our professional partners and our architects at H2M, Veronica Burns, who's here with us this evening, and really trying to outline the scope of the project and look at the opportunities that are before us as a school district. So with that said,
So, just to start it off, this actually is a great presentation, so the Buildings and Grounds Committee will catch you like and not like, not way. Here we go. So, in June, we going to just talk about the 3 ones that I haven't read. So if you did not have a chance to see the presentation, I referenced this so that you can go back to our Word docs and find that one. That'll give you the background information that we talked to. Okay, so I just wanted to make that point. So, and then the next slide. Tonight, we're just going to go through the project timeline, scope of work, and then talk about our next steps. Yeah, one here, let's go. So we just wanted to talk about the fact that the part of the capital projects is really aligning with our vision for tomorrow. We're building this into the strategic plan and using that to inform what we're doing. So Chris wanted to spend just a second or two talking about that, and then we'll get into the timeline. This microphone's not on?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. Well, Chris is talking.
Well, I think Carol really stole the thunder. So through our process, we've been making sure that we're making connection and allowing our strategic objectives to really guide our work. So when we think about all the projects, we're thinking about how they connect with the different objectives that we have as identified on this particular slide. And in our strategic plan, we have 6 different objectives, and you will see connections that come up related to not only number 6, ensuring the fiscal health of the school district and providing for a high-quality learning experience, but we also want to make sure that we're encouraging some innovation. We want to make sure that we're connecting with the social and emotional growth of all of our students. So when we step back and we think about some of these different projects that we have before us, you can see the connections that sit here. Some are directly related to safety and security. We understand that's related to our facilities, but we also recognize when we flip back to the previous slide, when we're thinking about looking to foster the social and emotional growth of our students. So when we think about having secure, safe environments, we have to be realistic and understand how that affects our students' well-being, their ability to be able to focus in our school environments. Likewise, when we think about looking at improving our academic spaces to not only accommodate contemporary learning styles, but we want flexibility. Spaces that are not going to be those traditional classrooms where we're going to have students sitting in rows, but they're going to be able to accommodate learning styles and a variety of different types of learning experiences. We're also thinking about other needs that exist in the school district related to, of course, academics, but how the facilities tie into supporting academics, because certainly they need to be conducive to student learning and the teachers' work in leading that learning. We have a number of challenges that we've discussed along the way related to storing needs and protecting our resources, so that takes on a couple different fronts. One, we can think about our beautiful new track and field out in front of the building, but where do we store our track mats? Where do we store the hurdles and other track-related equipment? We have a deficit there. We also have a number of vehicles that the district owns to support its operation, and we don't have a garage to store or maintain those vehicles, which is highly problematic. We have a lot of aging facility and, needs that are before us, as comes with any school district. When we think of them, immediately we can jump to boilers, think about rooftops, think about windows and doors, that envelope of a building and the operations that keep the building going. There's just repairs and updates that have to be made. And then, of course, when we think about that, in comes in energy efficiency. So not only do we want to be friendlier to our environment, we want to reduce our costs, but we want our operation to be something that's educational and that's going to be something that can help motivate our kids to be eco-friendly in their lives. And in many cases, we'd be taking, I think, some lessons from our students on that front.
So in May and June, we held our committee meetings with the community members and some of our staff members to define the scope of work, to begin the initial work, and get basically some feedback. So we had those 4 meetings, which we talked at length about in our June meeting. And since then, H2M, our architecture firm, has been busy working on concept sketches and making some presentations. So basically right now I'd like to invite Veronica up from H2M and have her talk to a little about the timeline about what happens next, because there have been some changes in our thought process.
Good evening, everyone. So yeah, there has been a little bit of a change in the whole thought process. So as Carol and Chris mentioned, that we've been developing sketches over the summer and meeting with the facilities committee to review them. And most of those sketches at this point are complete in terms of the items that require more design. The things that we still need to tackle is just identifying which unit ventilators need to be replaced and what doors need to be replaced and things of that nature. So the work that was happening, essentially those sketches started in July. We finished them in August and met on the 24th to finalize all of that work. So what we're going to continue to do now is work with the construction manager, Triton Construction, in order to continue to feed them information so that they can price out all of the items that have been identified by the committee. So that will take quite a few weeks for Triton actually to do that work. So that's why the timeline notes September through November 15th. So it takes about 3 weeks to actually prepare the cost estimates. Then they get reviewed with the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and then ultimately presented to the Board of Education, presented to you, and a discussion in terms of what items actually do get included in a potential bond project. So we estimate that timeline will be approximately, from now, September 4th, through the middle of November. Then the next thing that actually happens once that complete scope of work is defined is the SECRA process. And SECRA is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And as a public agency, you are required to do an environmental assessment for the project. And essentially what that means is that you need to determine if there's any type of environmental impact on the potential project that you're proposing to move forward with. So generally what districts do is they do an environmental impact study based on the broadest scope of work or the biggest scope of work, and then you still have the opportunity to remove items from that list. So ultimately what happens is that an environmental assessment form is completed and it's presented to the board, and the board declares themselves the lead agency. And it's a self-governing body, so it's not that you have to submit it to someplace else to get a building permit or a permit. It's just you're the governing agency, and we would provide recommendations to you for that. There's 3 types of actions as a result of the SECRA process. It's a type 1, a type 2, or unlisted. So we haven't actually determined because we haven't done this process yet, we haven't actually determined whether it's a type 1 or a type 2 or unlisted. Type 1 is the longest process, and it could potentially be that based on the scope of work. However, it could be an unlisted. So generally, we're looking at about a 2-week time period for a type 2, which is the easiest process to get through, to about a 3-month period for a type 1 in order to get through the entire SECRA process. And once you declare yourselves the lead agency, and that's complete, you can move on to the next step and actually decide to move forward with a scope of work for a capital project. Yep, closer.
Just hold the mic a little closer and project a little bit, please.
Sure, absolutely.
That's better.
So ultimately, once the board declares themselves the lead agency, we would estimate that will be about February 12th, assuming that it is a type 1, which is the worst case scenario, type 1 action. And that's really where Carol was talking about where the time frame essentially is delayed. If you were doing mostly interior renovation type work, then it would be a much easier SECRA process, and it would be a type 2 action. It'd be a much quicker process, and you could potentially move forward with that original projected vote earlier or at the end of this year. But if it's potentially a type 1, that vote does move into next year. And the issue is that you can't actually declare yourselves the lead agency until the entire process is complete. And then you can move forward with the actual deciding to move forward with a bond vote. So
Just a quick clarification.
Yeah,
When
sure.
you say next year, you mean the same academic year, but 2019?
Same academic year, but 2019. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So that gets you through essentially February, and then if it turns out to be a type 1 action, there's a 30-day wait period that you need to wait for any agencies having jurisdiction to comment on the environmental assessment form. So that's where that notes potential comment period for our agencies having jurisdiction. So essentially, once that happens, that puts you at about March 12th, and then bond counsel prepares all the necessary resolutions, and then you can move forward and move forward with a bond vote. So that time period for an actual bond vote, after that happens, is 45 to 49 days. after you decide to pass the resolution moving forward with the bond. So that entire process pushes you out essentially into the beginning of May, tied so closely to your budget vote, which I think that, it was possibly a discussion to actually tie it in with your budget vote, or perhaps a little bit sooner. So once the bond passes and we move into the actual construction document process.
All right, so, yeah, so basically just wanted to just pause for a second
Sure.
and state, to repeat the key points of why we are changing the proposed vote date. And really, we're looking to get a little bit more accurate information to make informed decisions. And that's really all that cost estimating that's taking time. There's been some designs that we think have a lot of merit, and we really want to get the cost estimates for that to make an informed decision. We want to allow for time for community feedback, and I think we felt it was just a little bit too tight, the time frame previously. The secret process, Veronica just really went through and explained, if we're going to be in that type 1 process, we really wouldn't make it by December. And we want to allow enough time to create board consensus. We don't want to just have a vote for the sake of vote. We really want to have thoughtful process here. And so that's the other reasoning. The good part about it is, which we're going to explain now, is that really it doesn't delay the start date of when construction would happen. Because of the way the SED processes work, and because of the fact that we do our work in the summer, for the most part, we would still be pretty much targeting the exact same summer to start. So now I'll go to the next slide.
So as Carol mentioned, it doesn't actually delay the start of construction. So assuming there's a budget in the middle of next year, May of 2019, we would start to prepare the construction documents after that. And what the state says is that you actually cannot pay for any professional A&E services until the actual bond passes. So that's the reason why you have to actually wait for that to happen. So we would prepare the construction documents. We're estimating June 2019 through December 2019 for the preparation of construction documents. And again, that depends on the actual scope of work that you decide to move forward with. And so it's somewhere between 6 and 9 months. Once we finish the construction documents, they get submitted to the State Education Department, and that's when the actual building permit or review process starts. There's 2 paths that you can take with the review process. You can choose the traditional route with the State Ed Department, which takes, at this time, they're projecting about 40 weeks to get a building permit, or you can go to the third-party route. There's an additional cost for that, but it does reduce the time considerably to about 2 to 3 months. So right now, what's in the schedule is noted a January through October review period for State Ed, which is that traditional period, the traditional time period, which would not cost the district any additional money. Then essentially a November through March bidding process, and ultimately you want to bid the projects early. You want to get the contractors on board early, so they have all their work set up for the following summer, so that when June comes around, the contractors are ready to start as soon as the kids are out of the building at the end of June or middle of June. So as Carol mentioned, it doesn't, whether or not that the vote happened in May or it happened in December, you would still not be starting any large-scale construction projects until June 2021. And then there are some smaller projects that could potentially get started in 2019 or 20, and I believe some of the projects that could potentially be in 2019 could be a phone system, be something like that, or some security upgrades. In 2020, we could probably do some of the easier projects like the roof repair work, potentially some unit ventilators possibility.
Now this is where the rest of the board can join in on the scope of work. So we're just going to go through, similarly to what we did in June, is go through the scope of work that we've identified to this point. And the work of the committee now is to really start to make sure these things stay on the list or to delve into it. And to that end, we really need the cost information. There's a couple of items we've kind of maybe thought about that we think may or may not make the cut, but it's really too premature at this point. So the key need is the safety and security need, which is to add walls and enclose our walkways, secure our open buildings, especially here at the campus. Also at Main Street School, where we have the walkway into the gym. So that's really one of the key parts of this project. We also are looking
And the result is to create a single point of entry.
to create
for
single
each
point of
school.
entries, which is where the new vestibules come in. That was where I was going.
Yeah.
So that we can have a vestibule with security, and the person can come in to the vestibule and then be buzzed into the building. So actually, the check that we're doing now, in most cases, they're already in. So, and while people are cooperating, this would be a little bit helpful to really make sure we're managing that. Some of the cameras we probably will get done before this. We're hoping, but if we really want to have cameras everywhere, then that's an infrastructure change, because then we would need extensive wiring, extensive systems. So that we keep it on the list right now, but we're really going to try to tackle some of this through budget if we can. And that's the other recommendation. So as we get into the budget process, some of these things may come into the budget process on an annual basis if we can. The swipe card door entry system, it's a costly endeavor. We're going to look into the cost and see whether that remains as part of the capital project, whether we could do it ahead of time. It does require SED review, I'm being told. So again, there's a lot of wiring and changes. And then there's right now a lot of our door hardware is really not compliant. We have purposely not changed it because we were hoping to do it in combination with the swipe card key access, and not put good money in and have to redo it all.
Re-ask questions now or slide?
I
or
think
wait
you
till
can,
the-
Dave. Yeah, sure.
Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about, just give me a visual on what that,
Swipe thing is?
no,
No.
I know what that
I know
is.
what he's gonna say.
I'm
walls?
I'm confused. I understand that first bullet, clearly. I just would like to visualize what that looks like and without getting into Trump land.
Well,
Okay,
I think,
so
one of the things they're costing out, and I think at that point, when we start to talk more in detail about each of these elements, I think in some cases we'll be, particularly this one, we'll be able to start to show what that would look like.
right. So there's a couple different options, in terms of whether you build glass wall, whether you build walls with gates. There's a lot of different choices here. So I think, again, as Michael just said, the cost is going to really help us figure
Give
it.
me a visual of
Like,
like.
Oh, so-
Dave,
So
like,
for
for example, like
So-
between the science building.
Yeah, that's what I'm
and
talking
the
about.
main- And you have the walkway there. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, between the
I have a
campus.
visual, forget it.
So in the quad areas, especially good areas, you can enter, right now you can enter through the basketball court. You could enter between the science building and the middle school. You could enter in the front of the building between the middle school and the Mar Gym area. You could enter down by where the cafeteria loading area is, behind the school. There's all these places. So we're trying to create
Barriers.
barriers there
Yeah.
so that
So
you
can't
can't
just-
enter
You won't be able to
there.
just walk onto campus,
Right.
like.
Got it.
You can still see.
And if a student does enter the back way, like say they're coming from Field Point, they really would have to then walk around the building to get into one of the main entry points. We're not saying that we're going to close that, but we're saying that would need to come around. And the student that's coming from the high school to the theater gym building has to either go through the school or has to walk all the way around outside, but they have to then, but mostly they're going to have to go through the school to do it
So it's
now.
either through the school or out the front door, around to the parking lot to the.
Right, so
Okay.
the idea is to
Mhm.
create secure access. It's pretty much an important idea at this point.
You got this fancy stuff.
So also with safety, there's more minor things too, but like these are all in a sense safety because we need to improve our lighting. There's a lot of places where lighting would really enhance safety. We still have radiator covers on, we need to put radiator covers on exposed radiator piping at Main Street School. We have an old coal chute. Is it a huge problem? Potentially not, but it's something that's on the list. We're keeping these items all on the list at this point until we understand the costs. We do have exterior shade panels here at the high school that have started to crumble and come off the building, and that's a safety issue if that were to hit a student. So we've been repairing, but we really need to address that issue. Chris talked about safety bollards and adding more of them and continuing that process. One of the ideas from the committee work was to limit hallways during after-school use to prevent students from going in other areas so that we wouldn't have, we would know where people are and not have to worry about where students could potentially be. And right now, we don't do that. So it's an idea. It's not maybe something we keep, but something we explore. And then the committee also talked about putting safety film on windows so that, again, where there was a lot of glass, we could maybe have a little bit more protection from an intruder. Academic student staff needs, we talked about the strategic plan and how to create some better flexible learning spaces for all of our schools. That's the part that's a little tricky, and where Veronica talked about how an architect really can't get into the nitty-gritty of design, and that's where that 9-month period comes for design. So we can talk about a budget for this and some general ideas. We really can't pay them yet to do a lot of design on that until the community votes for it. So you're kind of in a catch-22 here, in that you have this idea of what you want to do, but you can't pay them to do it yet because the voters haven't approved it. So we could put money aside, we can get some general ideas for what we want, but we can't get into too detail yet, and that's part of why you're going to have a longer time to create construction documents. And that's also when you'll have real work of meeting with the principals, meeting with students, getting more community input on exactly how you might want that to look. And an example might be how we would redefine the media center here. How could we separate it? We did a lot of work at our community groups on ideas, so we have a sense of what we could do, but we can't get into too much detail there.
And the media center is what we used to call the library.
The library, media
Yeah.
center, yeah. So, you know, there's how to separate it. One example of an idea would be to take one area, make it a quiet area, one area to make it more of a collaborative student area where people actually could eat, you know, but then make a wall so that that noise didn't go into the other quiet area, or creating some classroom area for other types of collaborative group work. So as kids are learning is different, we would want to change our library. And, you know, the point that was made in our Buildings and Grounds Committee, which some of you guys will attest to, is that, you know, we have to think 5-10 years out now, because this is really what we're designing for the future. It's going to take us 3 years to get there, but we have to think that long. And it's difficult because we don't always know everything that's going to be happening. But that's where our thought process is right now. We've talked a lot about outdoor bathrooms, the need for that. That falls also under security in my mind, because it's a need when students are coming in the building, especially in the after-school hours when we still have staff here, but we may not have students to worry about, we have staff to worry about. And then, you know, from a security point of view, it would be good to have it outdoors.
You know, I just want to jump in. I mean,
Sure.
also, moving towards a single entry point, which is in theory going to be closed during live hours. You're not going to have the access to the buildings
Right.
anymore. So to be able to keep people out during the weekends and off hours is really important for the security and safety overall plan.
Mm-hmm. And also maintaining our buildings, because if there's less wear and tear on the inside, that helps to keep your costs down, custodial and everything else. Classroom casework is really how you store things, where you put things in a classroom, shelving, closets, things like that. Primarily, we've been talking about our art and music rooms, where right now we have too much stuff on shelves, too high. It's just not real good there. So that's one of the areas we're talking about. Potentially, if depending on the cost, and you know, it's going to be up there, but maybe some of the older rooms in the high school and the middle school where we haven't really addressed it in several years. That's again where we might just say, here's a budget for this amount, and then see how many rooms we can get done with that amount. So that's where we have to get a sense for cost. The phone system and improving the PA system, that's definitely on the list. You know, I've talked about that numerous times. Is it something we might be able to budget for? We're going to keep looking into that in the short term. Enhancing the upper quad area to facilitate learning. So there was some ideas there in terms of creating maybe some more uses for space to create learning areas. And the bleachers is more of that's also a safety issue and an academic staff need. We like to have bleachers. We don't have a requirement to have bleachers, but we certainly like to have them. Our bleachers aren't really in compliance right now. We've jerry-rigged them as best we can, but there's some talk about moving them or combining them with the field tower that we used to announce games with and such, and then also maybe combining storage. So a lot of ideas out there. We're really getting some good ideas. We've had this on the list of the last capital project, and it didn't make it, but we actually already have SCD approval for that. So that's something, if the voters approve it, we could actually start that summer, because I already have SCD approval. Yay.
For the girls' bathroom.
Yes, we do. And that it doesn't go old. I still have it. I'm holding on to it. We would like to talk about maybe redesigning our cafeteria. And this isn't something where I'm saying we have to change the walls, but we have to change the interior of it. Adding booths, adding charging stations, adding a better way for the kids to eat and collaborate. I think like retail spaces and what Starbucks or Panera or these other companies do, and how inviting that is. Same thing with our high school atrium over here. We want to really turn that into a more usable space for our students. We have this plan to have one lunch period for the high school. We're going to need to have places where these students can eat. and not just be in the one cafeteria. So we have to have satellite locations for them. And that's just basically how kids are anyway. You know, they want to be able to congregate in smaller groups. I already talked about the media center. On the list is relocating our faculty lounge, which isn't in the right location. It's not something we may or may not be able to do, but we're keeping everything on the list at this point because we're still trying to evaluate. Improving the locker rooms at the Mar Gym is something they're outdated and they're apparently not sufficient. You know, I have to kind of look into all that. Theater needs, it's replacing the carpeting. Right now, we're placed to house the sound equipment because it's very exposed. It just stands out in the middle, either in the back or right in the middle aisle there of the theater. Chris talked about that we don't have places to store our district equipment. You know, we're replacing trucks too frequently because they rot out. They're stored outside. We have snow plows that when they have to attach the plow to the truck, they're doing it outside in the cold weather. If they need to change the oil on something, they're doing it outside in the cold weather. I'll just keep saying that, outside in the cold weather. So, and it takes a toll on the equipment and the guys. So we would like to have a building for that. Also a storage shed for our athletic equipment, Chris already mentioned. And I talked about the classroom casework. So you notice some things are on multiple lists just because they kind of actually fit in more than one location. And we chose to present this by the different areas of need for this presentation, not by building or by the actual list. So from an infrastructure point of view, we've talked about roofs that we could those could potentially be done a little bit sooner. But again, there's still design work and there's still SED approval for this. But we know we need a new roof over the library wing that's been leaking. And there's definitely some panel repair. It's not as major as a new roof, but and we would be looking to add gutters to manage our rain flow on heavy rain days. There's a bunch of stairwell, exterior and stairwell fire doors that basically have a lot of corrosion on them, and they need to be replaced. Some of them, you know, if you really pushed hard, you might actually push that door, and that's just not a good thing. The fencing at Mazzaro's Field, again, could we raise money to do it? Could we put it in the budget? These are all topics of consideration, or do we keep this on the list here? The ceiling tiles in the locker rooms at the TG building, they're exposed. There's been a lot of damage to those over the years. I've already talked about the shade panels at the high school. Those waste lines at Main Street School that need to be replaced. That's some of these things I'm going to probably tell the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and so will Gary, that they're really not negotiable. These are things you just have to do. So they're going to have to stay on the list, and we're just going to hope the cost isn't as bad as we hope it is. But some things just have to get done. So floor abatements is one of them. You know, when we try to think about, you can only condition the floor so many times. At some point, you really have to take it all the way up and do it right. Moving the electrical service underground at Eastfield, it's a great idea. Whether we could afford that, I don't know. It would save us costs every time the power goes out, and we have to restore that power. Finally, there's energy and efficiency needs. The boiler at Dow's is definitely outdated. It's past its now, I don't want to say useful life because it's still running, but it's subject to major repairs at this point. The unit vents at the high school are outdated and they need to be updated. We want to put a standalone unit for the CPR because right now we are cooling this room and the entire library. They're together. We could potentially not be cooling that library right now and saving ourselves money. There's a couple of situations like that. This is one of the main ones. LED lighting is better lighting. It's cheaper to run. The bulbs don't go out as frequently, but it costs money to do it. I think we did the gyms at Main Street and the campus in the past project, and it's great. The lighting is great. I don't think we've changed one bulb, not yet at all. There's a couple places where our windows need to be replaced. Luckily, not too many. Okay. Still on the list is air conditioning for classrooms, as I think any teacher or student today would have told you is a necessity. But whether or not, again, we could afford this and how we would even go about it is something that's still on the table and could potentially be put in the project. Building a maintenance system, that's where you can control your HVAC systems from a distance. You can get alerts that things are not running. You can control things remotely. And so we have that ability in some locations, but not everywhere, and we need to update that. We also would like to look at where can we add solar and other types of energy efficiency means. And we have, you know, if we're gonna put a new roof, we could potentially put solar. You can't put a solar on an old roof, but you can put it on a new roof. And maybe there's a couple of our other roofs that are new. We have a new roof at Main Street School, potentially we could put it there. So some things like that. You know, wind towers, I don't know. But there are other types of towers where you can put a stick in the ground and have solar panels beyond the stick. I'm not very good at explaining these things, but there's a lot of other ways we could do it. Again, we could explore all of that. And we're still looking at some of that. We've talked about having generators for backup during storms and power outages. To what extent we would need to add to our electrical and have that as a redundancy would be something we want to explore. And then we have paving, sidewalk needs. Again, we're going to try to keep addressing this with the budget, but I'm certain we're not going to get to all of it over the next 2 years in terms of our budget. We have to pave our parking lots. We'll have to maintain these areas. We've talked. We have great ideas to add a gate so that people can't come in except when they're supposed to be able to come in. Improving our traffic flow. There's been some cool designs that you've come up with already that we are thinking about, and just in general, repair of sidewalk and concrete. So that really kind of brings us to where we are at the moment. And as we've said, Veronica and H2M have started to create, or have already created a good amount of concept sketches for us to talk about. They're now adding that detail and getting Triton to help us cost estimate everything on the list. So those are the 2 yellow items. That's basically where we're at right now. And then we move into what else we have, which is to prioritize all that work and to make a recommendation so the Buildings and Grounds can delve into that over the next 2-3 months here. Start to host our forums to see what else the community, ideas on this, and then make a final determination so we can determine where we are, what secret it's going to be, and then really know for sure where we're going to end up in terms of our timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say one quick blurb about this and then open it up for any questions. But essentially, I think some of the big headings are that we're looking to provide better security on our campuses, to improve our ability to maintain our facilities, and to also modernize them. And clearly, we know the importance of security. In terms of maintenance, as we discussed last year, after the recession, one of the first things to get cut was our spending on buildings and grounds. And as we discussed last year, annually, it's just very difficult to be able to catch up. And then modernization, the opportunities with energy efficiency, with new flexible learning spaces are real opportunities. And the reason why now that was shared before is that obviously this can take a long time, and some of these things we'd like to get sooner than later, particularly with catching up on maintenance costs only go up. Security we want to do as quickly as we can, and that this is time to retirement of debt. So one of the things on the table is that we have the ability to do this as a tax-neutral bond in the sense that taxpayers would not be seeing an increase in their taxes to do this work. And as Carol referenced, it takes a long time to get this done, and we also have to be forward-thinking in that if you have students in the school district now, by the time some of this work gets done, my kids will be out. If you have younger students, they will hopefully benefit from this work. And as stewards of this institution, this is work that we need to carry us through most of the next decade.
I think about the I don't know, it was the beginning of the year when we got that emergency phone call.
Last year.
Gentleman in the woods.
Yes.
Up by school.
Yeah.
And
It'll be a year ago this Friday.
Yeah, right. It was the first week of school.
Yeah.
I just remember that.
Yeah.
And thinking about this bond and thinking about safety and so forth. So.
Yeah. And just to point out what Carol was saying, as we this list is being with the input we have from our committees and from the professionals helping, is the ability to look at a wide range of options. Some of them will have to be done through bonds. Some of them can be done through our annual budgeting process, and some of them we won't be able to do at the end of the day. But with the timeline that was shared, the board and the community will have opportunities over the course of the fall to learn about them in more detail, and all together we'll have the process to see what stays in and what goes out. But I open up to questions. Do you want to start at the end, Beth?
I actually had two procedural questions. One had to do with what parts of, let's say, you could do everything that you've presented today. Which parts are those that push you into SECRA 1 instead of SECRA 2 or unlisted? Are those the solar issues, the outdoor repairs?
So the items that would potentially push you into a secret type 1 would be areas of site disturbance over 10 acres, which I don't think that you'll be in, or if you're building potentially near or want to build on wetlands and things, again, things of that nature. I don't think that you're within that category, but one of the things that potentially pushes it into unlisted or type 1 is building additions over 10,000 square feet. And what it looks at is the cumulative square footage for all of the work. So you potentially could have a 5,000 square foot one place, you could have a 2,000 square foot, coach's box or something like that, and a 500 square foot toilet building. If all those things add up to over 10,000 square feet, that potentially then pushes it over as well. So it's the things that are going to have more of a significant impact on the environment that pushes it towards the type 1. And again, there's nothing wrong with it being a type 1. It's just a longer process.
It's a different level of, and also intervention from outside agencies who
Yes, correct.
have a right
Yep.
to be heard. So then the other question that I had never heard of before is this third-party review in lieu of NICID review. So there's a fee associated with that. I'm trying to understand a little bit more about what that third party is
Sure.
and how that
Yeah,
works.
so it's actually not nicer, it's actually State Education Department. So typically, school districts get building, or I should say, always, school districts get building permits from the State Education Department. But the State Education Department has recognized that they are putting a tremendous burden on school districts because they're so shorthanded that the review process takes a very long time to get a building permit. So essentially what we're seeing now is about a 40-week lead time for any projects that involve mechanical, electrical, or plumbing work. And I've seen it easily go over a year on a larger project to get a building permit. And ultimately that's impacting your construction costs because you're potentially pushing the project out even further. So what they implemented in on February 1st of this year, 2018, was a third-party review process. And essentially what the State Education Department did is that they requested different private A&E firms to submit proposals to do reviews. And so those A&E firms need to get paid for those reviews, and that's where that additional cost comes from. So you have an option when you submit a project to the State Education Department. Everyone, bless you, always submit it in the traditional fashion, the building permit, and go through that, the building permit application, go through that typical process. And then what we would always recommend, because of this long review time now, is put the request in for a third-party review, and then you don't actually have to pay the fee until your project number comes up in the queue, and then you can decide, oh look, SED has a short review period at this point, we'll just go the traditional route. Oh look, or no, it's a very long review period still, let's pay that additional money and get to that shorter review period, which cuts it down to from a couple of weeks to the longest I've seen so far is a couple of months, like 2 to 3 months. And I think by the time this board is ready to submit projects, I think that they'll have that process streamlined even more, and it should be really down to a couple of weeks because they've really worked out the glitches or the kinks in the system. So the cost associated with third-party review, it ranges anywhere from about $7,000 to $8,000 up to about $30,000 for that review, and it's all based on, it's a sliding scale based on the estimated construction cost.
And the way you choose your A&E firm is that NICID gives the board a list, and then we do a bidding process, or is it that you're at the queue and you're assigned the A&E firm?
No, actually, yeah, what happens is, it's again, not through NICID, it's through the State Education Department, and there's certain A&E firms that are already on the list, and that they will, once you decide to go with a third-party review, they will send probably send Chris, the superintendent, the list of the potential A&E firms to see if the board has any issue with any of the firms that may be on that list.
Okay,
And typically what we've seen happen is that the superintendent or the facilities director will then send that list to us and say, hey, you know, what do you think about these, one better than the other, or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And just each fee, the fee could occur multiple times because we have multiple items?
Correct, yeah, so ultimately, the way projects are submitted to the state education department is per building. So you can't submit it as one big project because each building has its own building number. So at a minimum, if you're doing work at all 3 buildings, actually 4 buildings, because you have essentially 2 buildings on this campus, then it's 4 separate building permits.
So we're seeing as 2 buildings. If you're at Edgemont, which is a junior senior high, is that 1 or 2?
It depends.
Ours too.
It depends on it. It depends.
Two as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the max price then is 120,000 for based on?
Yeah. But I don't think it would be that
It's
high.
potentially
And
lower
I
because
would
it's,
say,
well-
actually, to come down to state ed details, we actually have 6 buildings in Irvington because Main Street is 2 separate buildings.
Oh, good point.
We have 2 schools here,
Yep.
and the reference tower is a standalone building
that's
as well.
correct. Yep.
Has its own separate SED code. So we would potentially have upwards of 6 projects.
So, and to give an example, a $600,000 PA replacement in another district cost about $8,000 for the review. A $15 million, multidiscipline mechanical, electrical, plumbing, general construction, site work project cost about $26 million, $26,000 to review.
26,000, yeah.
Yeah.
So just if I heard you correctly,
Sure.
because I remember the last time when we went through this process and we submitted our documentation to SCD, Bev was looking, oh, we're moving up in
Yep,
the queue, we're
that's
moving up
correct.
in the queue.
Or
So-
not moving.
Well, we were moving for a very long
Yeah.
time, and slowly we
Yep.
started trickling away, and we jumped sometimes. I
Yep.
even went on and looked.
Uh-huh.
So you're saying the third party, potentially, that we could go that route is, once we are out of the queue and they're ready to review us,
No.
at that juncture?
Nope. No, it's
Okay.
actually, once you submit the application to the state education department, they review the actual forms, the application, not the construction documents. Once that process is complete, which takes about 2 weeks, then you send in the request saying that you'd like to go for a third-party review, and when that number, and you get a review number, and every project, whether you go the traditional route or the third-party review, you get a review number, which you probably remember from looking at the projects last time. And when that review number comes up in the queue for third-party review is when you start, that's the, it's the time frame from the time the application is approved to they actually select your number in the queue is the shorter duration, as opposed to that 40-week duration when you're just waiting for the regular process.
But at what point do we get to say yay or nay? At that point, when we get selected?
When they say, okay, Irvington School District, your review number is, you're ready to be reviewed by the third-party reviewer, that's when you get to decide whether or not you want to take that route, or no, you'll just stay in the regular traditional route.
Okay.
The other thing I just want to note, 2 things I want to note. One is that there are different timelines within SED's review process, because if it's only engineering and they happen to have a lot of engineers, then it goes quicker. If it's more architectural, they have fewer architects, then it might go slower. So depending on the nature of a project, you have to pay attention to that. And so within the business official world, we're all talking to each other and we're trying to find out how this process is working, because some people went for that expedited review and found out they actually would have been faster in SED. Because the engineering only review was only like a couple weeks, and they wasted money. But others have found, well, depending on this project, it was better. So you have to know that we are all talking to each other. We're understanding the process. It's still being refined. They're adding more vendors, but they're being cautious because they want to make sure that the vendors that they do add are going to do the same type of review work that SED would have done. So they're also spending, right now in the very beginning of the thing, the people who did it in the beginning felt like they were gypped in a sense, because SED was kind of breathing over their shoulder and doing the same review twice. So it was a little bit longer. But it's evolving, but we are all talking to each other and we're finding out how it's going to work. So I will keep you posted on all of that.
Yeah, and typically what it is, it's the architectural, if a project is only an architectural review, which is, let's say, for instance, a roofing project, right now I believe the SED review time is 2 to 4 weeks. So you would never pay the additional cost for the third-party review, because you're going to have your building permit within a month or so. The engineering reviews are the ones.
I said that backward.
Yeah. The engineering reviews are the ones that are like 40 weeks at this point, so.
As far as
So, great, they, as people have retired and left,
they haven't replaced them, but
They-
now
they
they've
can't.
come up with another solution, we get to pay.
That's correct, yep.
Well, they actually can't hire, they can't hire people, they have openings. It's not that they won't hire them, they can't find people.
As far as the timeline goes for the next time that the full board will see the update, it sounds like we'll need those cost estimates to be worked
Yeah.
up. So we're looking at November, mid-November as the next meeting where we'll see an update.
Is that true? It's not October?
A lot will depend on what's coming in and what kind of data we get. So I don't want to make a commitment yet that I'm not able to meet. So potentially sometime between now and November 15th, we'll have a lot more information and we'll set up our meetings accordingly.
Yeah.
I just don't want to commit to something we're not really sure of yet.
Yeah, just in terms of the perspective, the opportunity here is to really take a look at, we went through the list of items, and we're not able to go into the detail on those items, because we don't know the costs, and as you said, it's even further down the line in terms of the design. But, that's the scope. So if there are items that you feel are, big holes that are missing, this is the opportunity to identify them. And clearly, a lot of people between the committee and the staff and H2M have been involved in trying to create an appropriate scope. And then the other part is to really understand the timeline. And the question you just asked is perfect, which is, as a board, do we feel comfortable with, will we have enough time to understand the process before we're in a place to approve it? And similarly with the community, will they have opportunities to provide feedback and also, particularly for some of us who were involved in the prior bond. At a certain point when we approve it, the district provides information, but we don't really advocate for it. So it really is a handoff to the community to make a judgment about whether to go forward or not with the bond. So giving the community time to have that discussion is important. Yeah.
And I think the one important to expand upon Michael's comments, what makes this bond a little different than the previous bond is the engagement of DEC. We were dealing with an environmental issue. So leading up to the bond, we were very, very specific as to what our designs were going to look like because the projects were linked together in so many different ways. So when we talk about some of the specifics.
Just to remind, that's Eastfield, and there were things that were buried, and we had to have DEC come
Correct.
in, and they gave.
Yeah, so we had to go through and we had to develop plans that would meet the state Department of Environmental Conservation standards and get their blessing to be able to move forward. So because of that process, we were deeply involved in exploring what our different options were, because whatever we put on the field, whether it was artificial turf or natural turf, would play into the design and ultimately DEC's approval. And then when we step back and look at the project and a little bit further, we were able to link Mazzaro's field to it because we were using some of the fill that we were removing from that field to go as the cap, and the same with the Dust Bowl. So we were looking at really concrete designs because of the unique nature of that process. Where here, this is going to be a little more kind of a step back from that. We're going to commit to say that we want to do X, Y, and Z, and there's going to be cost estimates. But then once we get into the approval, after the approval, that's when we're going to get into that fine tuning. And when we look at that idea of committee meet and look at the work that we're going to have after the approval, there's going to be lots of fine tuning that's going to occur. So we're not going to be in the same place that we were last time with all the levels of specificity that the community may have been familiar with.
Right, specifically the exact scope and what each project would look like.
Well, so in the fall, I think by the end of the fall, we're talking about the scope and the general cost estimate, and then seeing whether that's secret 1 or 2. It goes through that process. At that point, when we get to the end of that process, we then finalize what is going to be the bond. And once that's approved, is a second round where there's input, there's the design, and then, input from the board and community as well. The design process.
Mm-hmm. Because one thing that we didn't really touch on here is, we could also be putting up a potentially like Bond A and Bond B. If there were certain things that the board really wanted, for example, but, we created a priority list and we wanted A through F, but A through F is too much money. What is our number for to say tax neutral?
It will depend on the interest rates, but I'm gonna say roughly 13 to 15, $16 million.
Okay,
It
and
will depend on
if
what
we identify 20 million, I'm just using hypothetically numbers here, $20 million worth of projects that we think are important, we might say, okay, this is Bond A, which is to stay neutral, and here's Bond B, if you guys approve, we have a couple of options, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the scope will be beyond that number, so it's gonna be a determination of what do we still need that we can't live without, or that, or this is gonna set us up for the next 10 years, because this is really our opportunity now to go out and do something for the next 10 to 12 years.
So you're being pessimistic and thinking it had to go up.
Well,
that's not-
we have a
Yes.
window here in which the bond that we put together can be tax neutral. Anything we do over that or in the future would increase, people's taxes.
I just have a couple questions, I'm a member of the B&G, but I had not seen this presentation, obviously, until it was put together in the last few days. And I just want to say at the outset, it's really good, Carol, because I know how much detail we were given and how much backup material we have that went into creating this document that's putting it in, I think, a very clear format. And I particularly like the way you and Chris put page 4 together, which tells us what the capital needs are, broken into the different categories, and then ties it into the strategic plan. So it's a constant reminder that what we're doing always goes back to the strategic plan. But my only question is, I hadn't thought of it until I got this, that kind of along the lines, I think what Maura was asking, is going forward, when we receive the presentation and we get the backup numbers that support these projects, is it going to be presented in this format where we have safety and security needs, and we may have 3 or 4 bullets generally as opposed to all the backup, or are we going to start getting into more detail along the lines of what B&G has? Okay, so so this is just the general overview, but we shouldn't expect that it will be this general with a big number associated with it in terms of at a board meeting.
Right, there's gonna be a fine line, though, between giving too much detail.
Right, that's
too little detail.
right.
Because, again, some things we have a vision for, we may just allocate, we as a group may allocate X thousand dollars toward this, and then the detail will come. But we're still saying we're committed to adding this much. But as we make that decision, we're gonna know that I'll give an example, classroom casework, that one classroom might cost $30,000. So if we decide we want to do about 10 classrooms, that's $300,000. So we're going to basically say our budget would be $300,000 and we can do 10 classrooms. If it comes in more, we can do 8. If it comes in less, we can do 12. So that might be a decision, having a cost estimate number of what one classroom would be, or a general idea of what a cost would be for something like that. So we'll still have numbers, we'll still have a vision, but we're not going to we're just going to say classroom casework X thousand dollars. So I don't want to commit to having total detail, but I do think you'll have enough that you will make the decisions that ultimately what you want to decide. So I hope that helped answer that question.
I think it does.
Again, there's you don't see it so much in this presentation, but there is, there's an aspect to it, which is it a balanced approach? Is it addressing the needs of each of our schools? Is it, addressing security? Is it addressing maintenance? Is it addressing modernization? And so I think that as we get into the detail piece, that'll become more evident. But any other questions?
If we wanted to, if we felt like there wasn't quite enough detail or something wasn't answered, would we have the option of sitting in on so just as an observer on a B&G meeting at some point, or is that, how, it seems like the more folks who are knowledgeable, the better. So if we had some unanswered question, would that work out?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, so sharing the timeline, there is the idea of making sure that, the next time it comes around, the board is getting that detail, the community has the opportunity soon after, because we'll have opportunities for community. But certainly, there's always the opportunity to observe at a committee meeting.
I just had one more comment, and thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation. When we talk a little bit about I see that when you're talking about the combination of safety and communication updates, I would just suggest to B&G possibly that you also think about how you can fold in climate control issues there, or if you haven't already. Because when you're talking about the doors, the ceiling panels, the roofs, and we know that air conditioning, and we've seen this in Scarsdale recently, even though there have been all these reports about how important cooling classrooms is, and Carol had cited that in her original June report. It's extremely expensive, and just hearing what your tax neutral number is, it's above that number. So there are various aspects to the kind of work you're talking about where you're doubling up functionality. So you already talked about safety with communications when you're talking about your phones and your PA systems. But then I noted that when you were talking about repairing ventilators, univents, or those shades, that was more in terms of updating physical plant and safety, but those also could have energy-saving aspects to their functionality.
Same as true with lighting. There's a lot of overlap like that.
Yeah.
Agreed, totally agreed.
Yeah, that'll be important, especially when we're looking at things with more detail. Often they have multiple benefits, so absolutely.
This was just one way of putting it, but there's so many different ways you can present and categorize. It just can be,
I do like your 6 categories, though, because that is something you developed based on all the documentation you gave us that's on page 4. I thought that worked well. And going forward, if we're consistently going to kind of talk about the project in terms of those 6 categories, I think that's helpful, but we should and can tweak it.
yeah, I would say those are the themes, and then we have to then you still have to go by building, because ultimately we were going to have to go
Right.
by building, and then we can add the theme to the building, and we can keep cross-referencing things.
But I thought that was good.
Yeah, and I think we have to speak about one of the obvious questions, which is with this timeline, it ends up being quite close or essentially overlapping with when we go through our budget process and budget vote. And so that's asking voters to vote on 2, major items at the same time, essentially, which is very different than what we had initially projected, which is, this fall. So we have to keep that in mind. And that may be, as we get into more detail about what's in and what's out and how big the scope is, the reality is that that tax neutral may become, it's always important, but I don't think we want to lose sight of it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Valerie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica.
Did I say Valerie? Yeah, Ron.
So, do you have the consent agenda?
So it is a consent.
Consent is first, and then there's 3 policies,
Mhm.
nomination.
Okay, so thank you very much to Vanessa and to Carol and to everyone else for the presentation. Did I spell that? No.
Thanks,
and
Brian.
then-
Bye.
Right,
Good night.
and so now we're going to move to consent agenda, which is, as we discussed over the summer, we are looking to vote on whether to reorganize our,
Because that's separate from the consent.
Oh, is it separate from the consent?
The consent includes everything but items 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 1, and 2. So sections 6 and 7 are not included in the consent. Right?
that's confusing.
It actually lists it here that
Oh,
it
yeah,
does
no,
include it.
You're right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have 6-1,
6-1 to 6-3.
6-1, 6-3.
I think it's consent on those items, then if approved, we do number 7,
Correct,
and then we go to the rest of the consent agenda.
correct.
Okay,
My apologies.
yes, thanks, no worries.
You just missed 7.
So right now, it's a little unusual tonight in that we have 2 consent agendas. The first one involves the items under 6, which are policies that would reorganize, that would change language to recognize a second vice president in our policy, which we discussed several times over the past few months. So could I get a motion to accept the consent agenda?
And just again, for clarity, the consent agenda
Which is-
includes all of section 6, section 8, 9, section 10, and section 11.
Oh, so it does, it's
Yes,
all
so
those
it
items?
includes that.
It's all those items
What
separate.
stands alone where I misspoke earlier is section 7,
Okay.
which is actually, if the policies in section 6 are approved,
Right.
Then it presents the opportunity for the nomination election of a second vice president, and then, of course, we have to modify the line of authority within the board, which would be
Okay.
a second step.
All right, so it's items under 6, 8, 9, 10, is there 11?
Yep.
And 11.
Mhm.
Could I get a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, so Brian, sorry, Dave, and then
You
Beth.
get the next one.
Okay, second.
And then, any questions before we vote on the consent agenda? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, looks like that was unanimous. So what that does, which Peggy and I are doing together more or less for the first time, is we now will go to number 7, the nomination election of a second vice president to the board. And so if I remember correctly, I would ask now for nominations from the board for a second vice president. Yes, Dave?
I would like to nominate Brian Friedman.
Very good. Are there any other nominations for second vice president? Okay. All in favor of,
So, so we
Yeah.
just have resolved that Brian
Yes.
Friedman.
would be appointed second vice president of the Board of Education for the 2018-19 school year, and be administered the Irvington oath of office, which hopefully there's a nice marker here for me to do that,
Don't
okay?
we have to vote on it?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Right.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Brian.
Yay,
You're,
Brian.
you're Irvington's first second vice president.
You trendsetter.
Okay,
So, Brian, if you want to come over,
Do you have a pen I may borrow as well?
here you go.
Good pen, here we go. Excellent pen. So,
Lefty pen.
it looks to me as if you will repeat this section here, or read that section.
I, Brian Friedman, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of New York, and I will faithfully discharge the duties of second vice president of the Irvington Union Free School District School Board according to the best of my ability.
Excellent. If you would be so kind as to sign here.
one of the final entries in that final.
Does this go to the media center afterwards? Right? All right. Congratulations, Brian.
Thank you.
So we now have a next step related to that, which is the line of authority within the board, which will lead to some, I guess.
Yeah. So how this will play out, obviously, Brian would be the second VP, and then the line of authority would follow
I will.
by seniority
Always get moved.
with each election and the number of votes. So the higher vote getter in those particular elections would be listed above the others.
Which I believe remains the same order, except for that
Yeah.
Brian now.
Shifts.
Does he have to do,
Shifts.
I just
So-
joking, does he have to do it right now?
Can we do it like?
You want to do it
Right now?
another
Can
time?
we
Would you
wait?
like to
Well,
do
we
it?
didn't have time, I'm not gonna kick David out of his seat.
I just have to get all the stuff.
Dave, you look really
close.
comfy,
No,
yeah.
I just gotta close things and then, I don't wanna slide. Sliding.
All right. So just be prepared, next time we come together here, it'll
Shift
look
to the
a
left.
little- a little different.
My place to the left of Deb is solidified.
Yes.
And I enjoy it. What do you?
Very good.
You have to go down.
So skipping ahead, well, I want to thank, what do we have here, the PTSA? Correct?
Yeah, Larry Sheps.
Larry Sheps, where's that?
Oh, that's what you just said. I didn't understand.
PTSA with grants, we also had,
Here.
I believe, donations.
I see the PTSA Dow's Lane grant for Steve Max.
Did we do Larry Sheps?
I don't see it here.
Yeah, we did that one already, yeah.
That's
All
it.
That's the only
So
donation.
thank you to the PTSA for that grant and their ongoing support. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, September 25th, 2018 at 7:30 PM here in the campus presentation room. I will now ask for a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of talking about the employment history of particular persons. Can I get that motion?
So moved.
All right, Maura and Maria.
I'm just picking tonight, huh?
It's pretty close. It's photo finish. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break.